time to talk a little Flyers hockey now, one of my near and dear sports to my heart, as this Jekyll and Hyde team continues to drive me absolutely crazy. They win a great game against Pittsburgh last week on national television. Okay, now they're going to make their push. And they go up to Newark and just absolutely don't show up. Plus, it looked like Steve Mason might have played his last game as a Flyer, laying on the ice. And yet, they still have life. Flyers beat reporter Dave Isaac with us now to talk a little Flyers hockey. Dave, what the heck is this team? We can't figure them out, can we?
Looking at game 72, I think, tomorrow. I still don't know who they are. So that's not the sign of a playoff team for sure. Definitely not the sign of a consistent team. And they've been talking about that since September, and it's still an issue for them. So, they're 5 points out. Very unlikely that they make the playoffs. The consistency issue is one that they need to figure out for next year, because this year is pretty much a loss.
They do have 11 games left, not 16, as Chuck Berry was talking about. But I'll tell you, Dave, you and I both were in Newark. We were both at the Prudential Center, high above there in that press box. And did you think, like I did, that it was a pretty serious injury to Mason? And, okay, that may be it? I mean, because all of a sudden, there he is.
Yeah, it sure looked like it. He was just laying there motionless on the ice, and said the next day that he had trouble bending his leg there. He's had these kind of issues before, that with cramping and muscle spasms and stuff like that. In the past, he'd said it was dehydration. This time, that wasn't the issue. It was just something else, I guess. But yeah, that looked a lot worse than it really was that night. And the Flyers have to consider themselves pretty lucky that he's still able to, tend the net going forward. He did it last night, and he'll do it again tomorrow.
I try not to be negative Nancy all the time when I talk about this team, Dave, but there are certain guys that absolutely frustrate me, and yet with the Jekyll and Hyde nature, they turn themselves around, it seems. I wrote a note down that I heard the other night in the back of the press box about Sean Couturier. When that game was finished, he had 100 minutes of power play time on the season for 0 goals and 2 assists. That was Sean Couturier after the Devils game, I guess, game 70 or 71, right? Now, then Sean Couturier goes out last night, right as I'm ready to tee up and rip him. He goes out last night and probably plays one of his most inspired games all season.
Yeah, and they're all streaky individually and as a team, and Sean Couturier is certainly in that mix as well. And he's been a particularly polarizing figure when you question his offense, which is something that's happened since really his first season. And he's still a young guy, turns 24 in December, but in his 6th year in the league. So the sample size is big enough. You can't just say he's a young player and he's still growing into his game. He's got 405 games of experience. A lot of guys don't even make it to 1,000. He's almost halfway there. So, you kind of know what you have in him, but it's not going to be pretty offensive numbers. I think that when you look at that second power play unit that he's a part of, for the last couple of years, if the second power play unit is devised of mainly your penalty killers, that's an issue. And it means that the Flyers don't have enough offensive weapons. Now, that's something that they can take a look at in the offseason, but they still have 11 games left to try and figure it out with what they've got. And last night, that power play unit did get on the board. It was Travis Konechny late in the game. But Sean Couturier, they're still trying to find ways to get him involved offensively. He was on the sidewall in that power play, and now they moved him to the net front. They're still trying to find ways to get him going offensively because, just like everybody else on this roster, he's a streaky guy, and they're still trying to find the offensive side for him because the defensive side has been there pretty much since day one.
When he's healthy, of course. Dave Isaac with us from the Camden Courier Post and our 97.3 Flyers insider. Dave, how about the impact that Valterri Filppula has had, or what impact has Valterri Filppula had on Couturier's play?
Well, when the Flyers got Filppula, that kind of pushed Couturier back down to third-line center, which honestly is pretty much where he should be. He said that he didn't take it personally, that it means that there's more depth on the team, and he didn't think that his role even changed all that much because he's still going up against opposing top lines. He's still playing 17, 18 minutes a night. But the expectation of scoring, I think, is now lesser on his shoulders than it was, and I think that's probably a good thing, considering the output that the Flyers have seen offensively to this point. Filppula has another year left on his deal, 32 years old. I didn't necessarily buy Ron Hextall's argument at the time, but I think it's growing on me. Filppula's got a $5 million cap hit, but if you want Couturier to be in that spot, and I think that is the spot for him, that third line role, you look at the free agent class this summer, and it's completely underwhelming. There's really no names out there for younger guys that the Flyers would be interested in bringing in at term. And there's very few rental guys, so to speak, that would sign a one-year deal to come to Philadelphia. A lot of those guys who are a little bit up there in age and are willing to sign one-year deals want to do so with contending teams, and the Flyers aren't really going to be that next year. So I think the Filppula move isn't so bad, because you have this guy who may be a little bit expensive, but you would have paid way more on July 1st for somebody of his caliber. And in 2 years, then you see what you have. Maybe the first-round pick from last year, German Rubitsov, is able to make the jump. Maybe they have somebody else in the system that can come up and play center in that top six role. So I think that the addition of Filppula actually could mean good things for Sean Couturier.
German, not German, says Dave Isaac, our guest, as we talk some Flyers hockey here. And everybody by now, although Bobby Clark famously did not know how to say it or who they were picking, everybody knows how to say Claude Giroux now, and had a 6-game point streak snapped last night, but seems maybe to be finding a groove. What really stood out to me over the weekend, Dave, was that he did finally, after the Devils game where he looked none too pleased to be asked if the team quit, he did at one of the optional skates talk and sort of seemed to open up a little bit that he's not playing 100%. Did you get that as well?
Yeah, I mean, he told me that a couple of weeks ago. I wrote that, and the fans subsequently ripped me on Twitter because I've, said that could be the catalyst to have the Flyers get going, and then they lost the next game. So if you're looking for reasoned logic, don't go to twitter.com. But, that's certainly something that's been ailing Claude Giroux. That hip and groin surgery that he had last summer seemed to have stuck with him, or at least the rehabilitation didn't come as quickly as he would have liked. And he points to Shane Gostisbehere as well, who had the same surgery on the same day. I think you're seeing both of these guys start to skate a lot like you would have expected them to in the past now.
Dave, I want to ask you about the roster as a whole. And I was kind of going through the futile exercise this weekend of going through the roster. Do I keep him? Would I not keep him kind of deal? So to me, I'm kind of wondering, how much will the current roster as we see it today on March 20th, how much same or different will it be at the start of next season?
It's not going to be a ton different because they still have a lot of term left on a lot of those contracts. The biggest difference will be the defense. Mark Streit is obviously gone and has been since the beginning of the month at the trade deadline. Nick Schultz is a pending free agent. Michael Del Zotto is a pending free agent. I think you'll see some young guys end up coming up to the defense corps next season. Samuel Morin has now spent 2 years in the American Hockey League. Travis Sanheim has a year of pro experience under his belt. There's a guy named Philippe Myers who the Flyers signed out of their training camp last year, who's still in the Quebec League. That would be a little bit bigger of a jump for him, but he's 6'5", has a rocket of a shot and is right-handed, and the Flyers desperately need right-handed shots in the blue line, so that's another name in consideration there. In terms of the offense, I don't think you're going to see a whole lot of change. Oscar Lindblom is a Swedish prospect that's been tearing up the league over there, and I would expect that he would come over to North America, and I think he's got a very good shot at making the NHL roster. It's kind of different talking about Flyers off seasons now than it was a few years ago, because a few years ago it was, okay, who can they go out and buy? And the game isn't necessarily like that anymore, and Ron Hextall is certainly not like that. So the new players that end up on the roster, Flyers prospects, that they kind of home grew themselves, and that makes for a cheaper roster. And once you get several of those players, you probably see the effect of that. And it also makes them a younger team, and that's the goal for Ron Hextall.
Dave Isaac with us. You can find him on Twitter at Dave G. Isaac. He is Temple made like me, which I always enjoy. And Dave, a little roster blurb today, if you will, as you tweet out that the Flyers are probably going to sign NCAA defenseman Mark Friedman, the third-round pick in 2014. Do two things for me. One, tell us about Mark Friedman. And two, answer the age-old question of why they always take the photo day, the team photo, at the end of March as opposed to the start of the season.
Well, they do it at the. I'll answer the second one first. They do it at the end of the year so that after the trade deadline and all the moves have been made, you know that that's the final team. I could see the argument for doing it on day one of the season too. But in terms of the first question, Mark Friedman is another right-handed shot, which makes him which gives him some value there, and as a puck-moving defenseman, and he's probably not going to be Shane Gostisbehere, but a pretty nice find for the Flyers that. They've had a couple of these where they make the pick and then the next year the player makes a big jump, and he did that at Bowling Green. He's spent 3 years there, so he would be foregoing his senior season to sign a professional contract, and he wouldn't be a Flyer next year certainly, but he would then make the jump to the American League and be with the Lehigh Valley Phantoms.
How many points do they need to get to stay alive out of 8 on this 4-game road trip?
They probably need all of them, and they'll need help on top of that. This is a team that certainly doesn't control its own destiny, and one that knows the unlikelihood of getting back to the playoffs.
Dave Isaac with us, so we appreciate the time, pal. Thank you so much, and I really enjoyed visiting with you in the press box at the Prudential Center as we got to catch up on all things Flyers hockey. Thanks so much, Dave.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.